Wall Street was an interesting movie. It has a big opening, big titles, Sinatra singing, big old Hollywood titles. I went for Sinatra because he hadn't been used in a while because he was kind of out of fashion from the late 70s to the 80s. And this was one of the first usages of Sinatra, Come Fly Me to the Moon, that it was seen on a national level. And shortly thereafter, I noticed that Frank Sinatra was getting more and more bookings. And it was good because, he still had a lot of juice left in him. It was great. And I met him finally, right before he died, at a party at his house, and he was the king, man. You go to the party, and there was Sinatra. And Dean Martin, everybody, they could be there, but it was always Sinatra. He was the center of all eyes. There's something about Sinatra that has that thing that makes you look at him. Interesting story. I had a little conversation with him, and he kind of liked me. I think he liked me, or maybe he was just a little loaded. I don't know. He just said, hey, anything you need, anything at all, you get into trouble, you call me. He had this very paternal instinct about him. And he was criticized for it, like, trying to protect others too much and not being able to be vulnerable enough to be protected. Who knows? I don't know. But I really was flattered by his kindness and generosity to me. And then he died. This scene in the elevator is interesting because we wanted to my original idea, I shot it, but it didn't work, at least then. And it would be like 18 people would travel up an elevator in New York City, and they'd all be thinking different things. A thought here, a thought here. You have all these little weird sentences popping out from the interior monologues, and which is a typical New York elevator. And then, thank God, the door opens and everybody runs out because they can't stand it for 1 second longer. An elevator is worse than a subway. It punishes people. Love the titles. I like the fonts and everything. And as often with my movies, because I'm always long in terms of trying to tell a story, I try to tell it as deep as I can. I try to put as much in the titles as possible. So here is a world of information about New York, the big city, Sinatra. You meet Sheen as a young Bud Fox, and then he's meets his 3-4 steady guys. There's Chuck Pfeiffer. Chuck is a friend of mine from New York. He was in Vietnam, and he was a real, Princeton boy, and knew these guys. He's a good guy. Here, of course, is Lou Manheim, based on my dad, kind of. Lou Stone, Lou Manheim, played by Hal Holbrook, who I had always respected as an actor and wanted, and he accepted the role. And he had very few lines, but they're very to the point. Nothing wasted with this man, like my father. Not a man to BS, not a man to fool around. He's a man who's serious. And everything he says to Fox, is a bit like Tiresias, the blind man in Egyptian legend, talking. And yet the boy, Bud Fox, doesn't learn. He doesn't learn from him. Charlie Sheen is a bastard byproduct of the Charlie Sheen of Platoon, because this film was done immediately afterward. I did not want to waste time. Most directors, they get an Academy Award, they flip out psychologically. They start worrying about, will the next one be as good, and it's really a dangerous writer's, director's block type thing. And I made a conscious decision after winning the Oscar for Platoon in early '87 to go right back to work on Wall Street, which I had devised with Stanley Weiser. And my idea was to do a business movie and, use the power that I had from Platoon, which was, limited in terms of you get a short running span in this business. You got to be smart. And some people just sell out right away and, do films. Some people just sell out and take the biggest deal they can get. But I wanted to make a business film because my dad, Lou Stone, had been in Wall Street all his life, pretty much, except for the war, World War II, lieutenant colonel in the finance. But my dad had been in Wall Street for 30, 40 years. And it's an interesting man, very much like the character of Hal Holbrook in that he was a philosopher, an intellectual. He wrote a monthly economic letter that was printed by the firm and was translated at its peak at something like 20 languages, including Arabic and German and Japanese. A very well-respected intellectual and economics intellectual. However, my dad, although he worked on the street, never really, although he cared about it a great deal and thought about it too much sometimes, he really never really made any money on Wall Street. That's the funny thing about this thing, because, he made money for his clients, but he didn't make money for himself. So that's sad, but, my dad died, basically, had a good life, and he told me at the end of his life, he said, look, There's not much that I can give you because your mother, your insurance, blah blah. I only have this much left, and it was a small sum. And I guess if I hadn't had a career of my own, I would have been really freaked out. But he died in '85, and the movie was made in '87. It was dedicated to my father. And he said to me before he died in the hospital, he said something to the effect of, "I spent it as I made it, but I had a great life, and I did what I wanted to do," implying that I think that by saving was not in his nature, the concept of saving. Lou Mannheim is a variation of my father in some ways. I think my father probably was more outwardly humorous than Hal Holbrook's it was. But he would say things that were very deep and very sudden, and my father didn't waste time with small talk. He would just tell you, boom. He'd say one line, and that was it. He was Tiresias. You either heard him or you didn't hear him. He didn't care. He moved on. It's too bad if you didn't hear him, especially with his son, who he felt was an idiot. But, that was Dad. Dad fell asleep in my first Oscars in 1979 when Midnight Express, I won a writing award. My dad fell asleep before the award was given. That was his sort of attitude about life. But nobody had done a business film in quite some time. And that bugged me. I wanted to use the power of Platoon to break the genre rules, And instead of doing what was politically correct at that time, I really felt like, let's go back. And Executive Suite came to mind real fast because it was a brilliant movie with Bill Holden, Frederick March, and Barbara Stanwyck, made about 55 or 54 by Bob Wise, another one of his genre-breaking movies. Very smart movie. And it was a successful business movie. Unfortunately, Jane Fonda had tried The Crash of '79, based on Paul Erdman's book with Chris Christopherson, but it was so complicated that it was above the audience's head. So what I'm trying to say is it was no sure thing. Business was no sure thing. Business films never have been that primarily successful. It's a long shot. I was also influenced by Ernie Lehman's screenplay and Alexander McKendrick, Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis' Sweet Smell of Success. I wanted that pungent dialogue, that sense of every life, death, intensity. The intensity of big city dialogue, I love it. It's one of the best things I think is in this film is the way people talk. They talk New Yorker style. They talk right to your face, in your face. Here's a great little scene in a bar, for example, where here's his father and his son. They're just talking, And it reminds me in a lot of ways of the talks I had with my dad. So Marty Sheen, in a way, is a second father. He's like, a part of Marty Sheen is my dad, and a part of Hal Holbrook is my dad. It's a three-father film. Those two fathers are the ones that are gnawing kind of at my good conscience. And Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas eventually will gnaw at my bad conscience. And people criticized it, of course, as being the only theme I could do in my life because I had just done something similar in Platoon. And many people said, well, that's all that Stone can do. You can do father-son themes. This is only after 2 movies. But remember, I went right into this in May. And with the screenplay, it was tough because as you get closer and closer to the real thing, you have to really get it as right as you can. You can't always make it perfect. So I was bringing in really experts at the last second, and Liz Stanley was trying to fix things that were really screwed up in the script that came from previous eras, bad research, things that happen like that. It takes a lot of detail, this film. For example, we took the entire floor that you saw, the trading floor, with the numbers, the computer system. We laid in thousands of wires in those days to create a trading floor somewhere downtown New York. It took a whole floor, and we just redid it. It cost a lot of money, but it was a beautiful set and gave us a lot of freedom. Quiz Show was another film that I was considering. The origin of Quiz Show. I wanted to do a show about the quiz scandals in New York in the 50s at that time. And I was talking seriously at a Chilean restaurant on Pico Boulevard to Ed Prasman about it. And we'd been developing it, and I was bored with it. I don't know why. There was something. The more I found out about quiz shows, scandals, the less interested I became in it, you see. It's a very important concept that kind of has occurred to me several times, which is good. That's what research is about. Don't make a movie shallow, make a movie deep. If you go deep, that means you research. And if, unfortunately, the news is bad at the end of the line and you've lost hours of your life and days and people's energies and you got to accept it. You got to take the win one, lose one. That's what Gekko says in this picture at the locker room. You win one, you lose one, but you fight. You always hang in there till the end. In this scene, the son is hanging in there with his dad. It's a sad scene. It's a scene of a son who really loves his father, but he won't admit it. And he goes to ask his father for money, which is something I had to do several times in my life, and when I was struggling between the ages of 22 and 30 in New York City as a cab driver, messenger boy, husband to a working wife. It was a very tough time for me, and I almost quit screenwriting for many years. I wanted to be a director from film school on, but that was even more remote and tough. So I suffered in many ways greatly in those years. I suffered greatly. Although I'd been in Vietnam, I suffered. I wanted so much to be accepted as a writer, and yet I was rejected. I wrote approximately 2 scripts, 1.5, 2 scripts a year. Serious efforts, but none of them would go read. I didn't know anybody really in the business of consequence, and time went by, and I felt like perhaps I was a bum. My grandmother died when I was 30 years old, and I went over to Paris. In those days, they allowed the dead to be laid out on the beds for 3-4 days. I talked to her like a bit like that Brando scene in Last Tango. Just talked to my grandmother. And I cried, and I felt sorry, and I said, I really haven't achieved anything with my life. You sure about this? What? It was sad. And it shook me up deeply. I came back to America, in a sense, with more resolution and more backbone and more anger in me, and I wanted to do it right. So I went to work like I never worked before, and I wrote Platoon when I was 30, which was at least an effort of significance, and made me proud. Eventually I got to make it. I sold it at 33, and I finally got to make it myself at 44. Well, I guess this is my digital philosophy. Life comes down to moments, and this is a moment. And I like Bud because he's sharp enough to see it. He knows where he's at. He's self-conscious enough. This is it for Charlie.
We better be, and I'm gonna come down and eat your lunch for you.
Remember that Gecko doesn't eat lunch.
Sorry, Jeff. See, wait till it heads south, then we raise the sperm count on the deal, okay? Get back at you.
We raised the sperm count on the deal. It was an expression that Stanley and I came up with. All this is poison pill stuff. I mean, this is about getting into corporations, screwing it up, preventing the competitor from capturing it, and putting poison pills in so that they can't swallow it. It's a very intricate game. It was played out in the 80s. Mike Milken did his thing in Junk Bonds. But people really like Drexel Burnham, Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck was great. He was our advisor for a while. And he was a totally interesting man because he claimed to have been a Vietnam SOG type major Viet Cong fighter. And he was Michael Douglas's friend. Michael introduced him. I used him as a consultant. He appears later in the film. And we found out months later in the Wall Street Journal that he was a total fraud, that he'd never been to Vietnam at all. And he was bullshitting. But he had this dramatic flair, Jeff Beck.
And I think you're an incredible genius.
I went to Richard Gere originally to play the role of Gordon Gekko, but the script was not in this form. It wasn't as good. But Richard passed on it. And to this day, every time I see Mr. Gere, he always sort of remarks on the fork in the woods there because he feels that he should have done that film. And if he had, his career would have gone in different directions, which is very honest of him. And, I'd like to work with him myself. I think that Richard's achieved some maturity now that is very interesting. So Michael Douglas was considered by Fox, he was a favorite of Fox from Romancing the Stone, as a comedian or as a lighter weight actor. I went to Warren Beatty, and I spent a couple of days in a heady talk with Warren, but as usual with Warren, it's more about the intellect than it is about the actual pragmatism of doing something. So after many hours with Warren, we kind of, it didn't work. So then I went to Michael, because Michael was like his father to me. There was something genetic I felt. There was something tough in Kirk Douglas. It must have been passed down. And I knew Michael as a socially very attuned to money type. He knew the score. He knew the deals. And I felt it. And I wanted that kind of reptilian consciousness. Perhaps I'm insulting reptiles here, but Michael understood it. And he was born to play the role. Hélène Moroznik did the suspenders for Michael, and he dressed him through a beautiful designer, Italian designer. He was quite something in that time and designed some beautiful suits. Whereas we wanted to make Charlie Sheen into a cheaper suit, as you can see, something bought off the rack. And if you notice the behavior of the guys around Gecko, it's all class-oriented, This is the key. This is where the movie has to go forward. First of all, he walks in. He's got nothing to sell. Gecko sees through him. He's a lug from Queens. But what he hears right now is that Charles is telling him, I got an inside deal. The inside deal is that he is betraying his father, Martin Sheen, who has just told him that Blue Star's on the rocks. And it interests Gecko enough to make a little buy, which he builds up into bigger buys. He's testing, like Mephistopheles, the Faust of Charlie Sheen, pushing, urging him up, teaching him at the same time, educating him. But you see the look on Charlie's face right here tells you that there's a moral qualm that's going on. Whatever he realizes, Charlie knows what he's in for, and he knows that he sold a piece of his soul. Now, Franklin Cover over here is a great character actor for many years, and he's struggling for a job, and he's barely hanging on by his fingertips. Before the end of the movie, he will be fired, and Charlie will step into his place with an office. John McGinley from Platoon, Nixon Chicks became a classic kind of slangism in New York. I got tickets, Nixon Chicks. And McGinley centered the film in reality. And James Karen, I liked him when he was a little mean.
Plenty of six-figure names in that zip code file to cold call.
Cold calling. Right now they call it Boiler Room is cold calling too. So, in those days, young guys, they had to go out and they call. And they actively pursued accounts. It's a very frustrating job.
Here, baby, churn 'em and burn 'em. I am offering you the Knicks and chicks. I'll help you before you turn into poor Steeples over there.
Steeples is the guy who I knew from my father's time. The guys who would go out for the 2-3 martini lunches with the red faces when Wall Street was more of a gentleman's club. And, he came from a good college. Franklin Cover sort of is like from a Princeton graduate or something. And Chucky Pfeiffer and those guys, they're all... It was a class-conscious business back then. Now, in the 80s and the 90s, it's become less class-conscious, and definitely Charlie Sheen represents the concept of the blue-collar kid, the son of a union leader, going into that world. So this is the beginning of the breakdown of class in the pursuit of money, or as the English say about fox hunting, the unspeakable in chase of the uneatable. My God, John does look different. If you look at Nixon, he looks so different now. But he looks so young. That's I bagged the elephant. He got Gecko to buy the stock. See, the Statue of Liberty. That's the American dream. And it happens. And as predicted, Blue Star is exonerated, which opens up the possibility of a large stock jump, which Gecko will make. Now, he's been asked to 21 by Gordon as a reward and as a motivator for future deals. And he's tough on him. There was a new 21, and they gave me great cooperation. It's a slight homage to Sweet Smell of Success. That's Kenny Lipper to the left, by the way. Kenny Lipper was one of our chief advisors and is the real thing from Salomon Brothers. There was a little early version of the LSD internet access.
It's from my kid, Rudy. 3 years old, he's electronics freak. I tell you, we're going to a new age.
I love the fact that it's a little touch, but Gecko has already had lunch with another person, and he's sort of like giving coffee and dessert to Charlie. There's a charm between these two men. Charlie is smooth Malibu. Michael is also from California. But they share a similar ease of a comfort level between the two men. Charlie is playing it a little nervous, though. He's sweating. Oh, there's Monique Van Voren, an old friend of my mom's. She's a great lady, great singer, beautiful woman. Here's where Gecko really ups the ante. He says, okay, you gave me a good deal, but there's a lot more out there, kid. How many fathers do you have? How many deals can you make? You better bring me some good stuff. And here's $1 million to invest. Start. It's an interesting ploy. In fact, is going to be a very important thing because he's offering him not only $1 million to invest, but he's offering him a hooker, which you're going to see in the next scene. So there's perks. And Daryl Hannah is the ultimate perk. Gecko is definitely a heavy hitter or a gambler. I mean, I've known gamblers in Vegas. I've been with some who drop $5-6 million a shot. You know, they will do it, and they'll get $3 million back the next night. You know, you never come quite ahead at the casinos unless you're a Chinese. They got it figured. This was one of the first scenes we shot, and every scene that Michael was in had an enormous amount of dialogue, which he had never experienced before. So we had a bit of a problem here. Michael refers to it more than I do, but I don't see it as a big thing. It was just that in Michael's terminology, I came out to his trailer and said, "What's wrong, Michael? You know, have you ever acted before?" I mean, that's what he said. I don't know if I ever said something like that, but I meant that you're keeping this to surface. I want you to go deeper. This is not streets of San Francisco anymore. I want you to really dig a little bit more. And Michael, the first 3 days, was not on text, which is a terrible disaster. Pacino pointed that out to me, because if you're not on text, if you don't know your script, you are always going to struggle for the words. That means you cut down the time and the concentration of inner thought, which is what you need. So Michael, I felt, was hurting himself by struggling for the words, because he didn't have them. And, you know, who am I to blame him? He had huge monologues, but they were rhythmic. They had a rhythm, like a Mamet play. So I wanted him to hit it. So I got pissed off. And, you know, he much criticized me in the ensuing years for that. But God damn it, it woke him up. I'm telling you, he was so different the next few days. And not much need be said, except that he won the Academy Award. And it was never destined. He was, in a sense, the second actor, the second male of the film. But Charlie, being innocent and pure and somewhat dreamy, I see the Charlie Sheen characterization as a zombie state, you know, which is kind of interesting. Don't discount it. What a nice way to be seduced. The real problem in life is that when somebody sends you a woman and you may not like her, it's very hard to say no, because then that person loses face, especially in Asia. But Andrea Thompson did a great job here. She was a good actress. I wish I could have heard from her more. One small story that probably will bring you a chuckle is that I got a call in Madrid when I was selling Platoon in the hotel lobby from Tom Cruise, who was still very hot in those days. And Tom said, "I want to do Wall Street." I was faced with a dilemma, you know. Tom Cruise was a bigger actor, but I'd given my word to Charlie. So I said, "Tom, I'd love to work with you." And we did eventually on Born on the 4th of July, but I made my commitment to Charlie. I can't do it. Now, Charlie, unfortunately, did not understand the privilege it was to make a film and be a star. At that point, he was too young. Now he does. He's probably going to become a hell of an actor. But at that point, he was a little spoiled because Platoon went to his head a bit. It went to my head, too. And I think that here he partied too hard in New York. And I think that he wasn't completely paying attention. I was criticized for it, but I went with it in the same way that I went with Daryl Hannah, saying that this was a boy who was a little bit zombied out by what he saw, that he didn't want to make any mistakes, so he was like nobody. He was Mr. Neutral. We had to create all these electronic images, I mean, everything from the scratch up. It was a hell of a job. We created our own Dow Jones. These are details that are very hard, I mean, really, really details. Every one of those computer boards is working. This is a lot of work. And there's poor Franklin Cover. He's struggling. At the same time we were shooting this movie, Michael Fox was shooting Bright Lights, Big City in similar streets. And as you know, that was also a story about that period. I never was as wild about the book. But Michael's film, unfortunately, didn't succeed like ours did. Now, Charlie's going through a slump, too. He's not making the dough that Gordon Gekko expects. This is going to be a heartbreak. Phase 2 of Charlie's initiation. This is the really get serious phase. This is where he's going to ask him to explore and commit to industrial espionage. I did this scene again in a weird way in Any Given Sunday with Lawrence Taylor talking to Jamie Foxx. So he lost 100 grand.
Well, I guess your dad's not a union representative of that company, huh?
Uh-huh. Douglas does his checking.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information.
Information is the commodity. He's way ahead of his time.
Every battle is won before it's ever fought. Think about it.
True point.
How's the Praxar deal going? Oh, you should know, pal. Asshole.
Just a little quip on this side. I like to make my movies dense, you know, with weird people coming out of the blue.
I don't need it.
I am not just another broker.
This is a key point.
If you give me another chance, I'll prove that to you. I'll go the extra yard for you. Just one more chance.
Yeah. Thunder.
Please.
You want another chance?
Fucking A.
And you stop sending me information, and you start getting me some.
This is Michael
I'll show you my
at his coldest.
Wildman, the White Knight.
The interesting thing about Douglas is, as much as he hates Wildman,
Payback time, sport.
is that he concedes to him
I bought that building
in the
10
following
years
scene.
ago. It's better than sex.
It's better than
I
sex.
thought that was all the money in the world.
It's better than sex.
Today's
Is money better than sex?
What about hard work?
This is the second firing of Charlie Sheen. And down the path of all flesh. Now, this is an area that is interesting because, you know, you can follow people, and you can find out a lot by just following them, especially big shots. So, I find this realistic, although it's not done by many people. By a young, hungry man, it would be done, especially guided by Gordon Gekko. Another elevator scene. Terrence had disappeared from our screens for several years. Found him in The Hit. He's got a cool face. He goes to the cirque to follow him. But he has no reservation. Beautiful photography by Mr. Bob Richardson. Larry Wildman. He's at that time he was equivalent to me of James Goldsmith against Carl Icahn, who bought TWA around this time too. But Michael seems to have this thing laid out. It seems like he takes under his wing some of these younger. At one point he says, "I don't want any MBAs, you know. I want poor, hardworking, and hungry, you know." He wants the real guys from Fordham and business schools who are really trying to make some money. He doesn't believe in higher education that way. There's a salesman instinct in Gordon Gekko, which is very New York, and I admire that, you know. I'm very ambivalent about this film. As you know, I like Gekko. That's part of the reason I think Michael Douglas did so well in the award, was because we, Stanley and I, really reached out for him, and we wanted to like him in some ways. Although he's despicable in other ways, there is something, as with Burt Lancaster in Sweet Smell of Success, that, you know, that smirky, smiley, know-it-all attitude is kind of fun, too.
Street Chronicle.
That might be a stretch of the imagination, but Wall Street Journal gave us no cooperation. And they've been criticizing my films for years, so I took a little dig at them as well as Ford's. This is Stuart Copeland music.
15,000. Frank, 10,000 ANC at 46. Let me know how the auctions are opening, okay? Thank you.
So Charlie is becoming a player. Now, this is rare. We got on the floor of the stock exchange for 45 minutes during trading hours. This is the real thing. There's no extras. These are real traders. It is very rare. It was Ken Lipper who got us on. And man, it was great. I worked on the floor of the exchange, actually, when I was 18 in Paris. My father got me a job to his best friend on the cocoa and sugar exchange. These guys were like in Antonioni's La Notte. They would scream at the top of their lungs. And, you know, it was like, you had to juggle. It was like rollerball. You had to scream to be heard. So I'd take messages from the back office where the phones were, run in and give it to the chief trader. And there were days he'd let me at 18 years old buy and sell cocoa, which was pretty trippy.
Anacott Steel. Put your best customers in.
Well, there's my dad.
I got a sure thing.
He was always skeptical of any sure thing. I think Hal was unjustly criticized by some critics. He was so real. Because there are guys who care. He's a real mentor. He's a teacher. He doesn't bullshit with Charlie. He doesn't small talk. He tells him what he thinks. That's what my father was like that. I think that Stanley Weiser and I really worked hard on this dialogue to try to approximate Ernie Lehman's Sweet Smell of Success, because it's punchy one-liners. Chuck Pfeiffer's great.
Kamikaze over to Nels and chase a little cotton underwear.
Nels was a fashionable night spot in New York. Chuck Pfeiffer took me there. Chase a little cotton underwear is a very preppy kind of thing to say. Chuck was struggling to act. It was his first time. It took 15 takes. This must have upset the Wall Street Journal. He's a playwright, and he died, unfortunately, very young. He was on Saturday Night Live, friend of Doug Kenny's. I wanted to play an homage to the old 60s movies with the square blocks. I love it. It also accentuates the hurry, the speed of Wall Street. And montages like this hadn't been done in a while at this point. As you notice, the director himself appeared as one of the buyers. In fact, at the time I thought I looked too heavy, but looking back now, I think it was pretty thin. Now this is beautiful. So he goes out to West Hampton. The house is not as attractive. It's mod. It's not like Hampton's house with, Renaissance paintings and deep furnishings. When have you last seen a butler like that? Sean Young came on as the second female lead, and she walked into the trailer on the first day that I met her, and she said to me, in front of Daryl Hannah, "I'm Darien." I was really upset with her at that moment because it was insulting to the script. It was insulting to the other actress in the room. The irony of the whole thing is that time goes by, and, it was like Cassandra at the Walls of Troy, because she was dead right. She was Darien. I couldn't see it at that time. Paul Guilfoyle on the left is a good friend of Al Pacino. I used him. Daryl Hannah and her beauty.
Hi.
She was never happy with the role, and she shouldn't have done the movie if that was the case. She didn't want to be seen as that spoiled rich girl, that hooker type bimbo. But she misunderstood that. There are girls like that, and they play the scene in New York, and that happens all the time. So it's this disconnect between reality and political correctness, I run across at any given Sunday as a perfect example, in that there are 5 real women, in my opinion, in that movie. But it will never be accepted by feminists that way.
Stick around, this could be fun.
And it's all
That's Cecilia Peck on the right, Gregory Peck's daughter, and I was delighted to give her a role. Wonderful actress. And on her left was Annie McEnroe, whom I introduced to Ed Presman on The Hand. She was in The Hand. And he married her. So I'm a matchmaker. And she appeared in this briefly. It's a different clash of values. The Queen's boy who doesn't appreciate painting, whereas Daryl, on the other hand, is too much precious about painting. This scene Daryl had a lot of problems with. But, you have to be born to the mantle. Daryl is more of a California girl. She's a wonderful woman. Great outdoors woman, but perhaps I was wrong. It'd be more Gwyneth Paltrow today. See, the whole thing here is that it's a trap. I mean, Daryl is really working for Gordon. Now, this was mid-'80s, and I can't tell you, the boom in New York art world was enormous. Prices and everything. And I knew most of these young artists, except for Basquiat, who had died of heroin overdose. But Julian Schnabel gave us many of his paintings and suggested many others that appear in the film. And a lot of them are in this scene. Keith Haring, Jim Dine. There is a beautiful uncenteredness, vacuity to the character of Daryl Hannah in the movie, which is very, I think, apropos and accurate to a certain type of hanger-on woman in that period of time. So it may not be politically correct, but I think it is accurate. People who criticize me say, doesn't like women. That's just nonsense. I mean, I love women. But you can show tough women and mean women, and the same way you can show tough men and mean men. I don't discriminate between race or gender. I treat everybody the same, as Rex Harrison said. In My Fair Lady, I treat them the way I treat them. I don't try to kiss ass, especially movie star ass.
You're breaking.
There you go.
I always thought Sean Young would be a great 1930s character at the Algonquin with Dorothy Parker. She's so classy in a way. She was a very, very smart woman. And unfortunately, the film didn't work out for her the way she wanted, and I'm sorry it didn't, because she was a innocent soul. And from day one, always wanted to play Daryl Hannah's role, and perhaps she was the Cassandra of the whole thing in the sense that she said the thing that nobody wanted to hear, and she said it directly to Daryl, which undermined Daryl's confidence, and you don't do that. She said it and to other people in the hair and makeup department. It's a terrible thing to do. But in a sense, Cassandra doesn't care, right? Cassandra wants the role, says it, and the whole thing was skewered. And perhaps I must, wonder to this day, did I make a mistake? Perhaps I should have had it that way. So I went ahead and I fought it out with Daryl, who is a woman who I will never quite understand. Rediscovering Terence Stamp was a delight because he hadn't worked in a long time in America. I saw him in a film in Spain, which I loved, called The Hit, by a young British director called Stephen Frears, in which he was phenomenal. He had been a terrific actor in the 60s in British cinema, The Collector with Wyler, and with Terrorima, with Pasolini, worked very continental, very sophisticated London 1960s. David Hemmings. It was a delight to find him again and work with him and talk about the 60s. Michael, I love the squaring off here, the four. Look at the paintings on the wall. We really worked hard on getting the best we could, value-wise, on the wall. I called on many friends. I called on collectors. I really made an effort to put the best paintings I could find that would evoke an era, the 80s of the New York art world. Stamp is really tight in this, and he's based on the character of, in a sense, my fantasy of Jimmy Goldsmith, who died a few years ago. But Goldsmith was an impeccable British gentleman, beautifully dressed, and yet was ruthless. Some would say horrible, and some would say wonderful, raider, who raided many companies, and sometimes abandoned them, and sometimes didn't. So he has a mixed record, and he used to have tremendous conferences down in Mexico, sort of like Herb Allen has in Mid-America, and invite executives and members of the power structure down to his huge estate in Mexico and take him out on the boat. And he wrote a wonderful book, actually, about his views of the world in the 1990s. And I saw him once in Hanoi when it was private jet. I was amazed to be on the airport at Hanoi and there see Jimmy Goldsmith flying in on a private jet to meet with the Prime Minister about some new rapacious electrical deal in Vietnam. Goldsmith was no dummy. He was a right-winger, very Republican. He was not a stupid man. He was a thinker, and I respected him.
Money never sleeps, pal. Just made it.
Money never sleeps. I love that line. Money never sleeps, boy. Prove yourself. Constantly prove yourself. This scene I love. I shot it at twilight, not at dawn, although it is set at dawn. It is a twilight for dawn scene. Here's Michael giving in to a more tender side. So Charlie is driven to take greater and greater steps to prove himself because it's impossible to always have a stock tip, an inside tip. So now he's hitting on everybody he knows, including his old buddy, James Spader, who's a lawyer for a big financial concern. All these Wall Street lawyers are really running the system, and according to Buckminster Fuller, they started to run it after World War II. They took most of the money out of the United States. They drained the blood out of the United States and put it abroad. They call it overseas capital. What are they? There was a word for it, LOCs, I forgot, but it's in Fuller's essay written in 1982 called Higgledy-Piggledy. If you ever have a chance, it's a crazy chapter. Fuller sums up the entire, in my mind, economic history of the world, going back to Phoenician and Greek times, and he brings it right up to the present day. He explains it. He calls it lawyer capitalism at the end. The lawyers run the show. The laws, all the tax laws are the key to the whole thing. And in the post-war years, the tax laws were able to allow U.S. capital to go abroad at a very decent rate, I believe. And it all fled the country. And it stayed abroad. So America changed tremendously in the 40s and the 50s. We became a world power, at the same time, a rapacious one, with our capitalist system really into a major theft of the of our money, and it was inevitable to me that we went off the gold standard in 72 or 73 under Nixon, primarily because we were bereft, we were bankrupt, and all that bankruptcy that existed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, these recessions that we used to have, the young people wouldn't know, but they were. For my father, these were huge downturns. My father got wiped out on Wall Street, you see. He was a member of a firm, a partner. Hayden Stone, it was called. Not that he was the Stone of that name, but he had a partnership equity. And when that firm went bankrupt in 62 or 3, I think it was, he lost all his equity, all his life savings, you see. He was killed. All he had was cash. And when he died, he left me very little cash. I received $19,000. It was that was all I had. It was a lesson from Dad. It was like saying, "Here's the money I got left. Take it. It ain't much, but I had a great life. You go have a great life. You earn it." And I don't mind that. I don't want to be helped by my father all the time. Your father's got to be tough too. He's got to say, "Stand on your own, kid. I'll give you an education. From then on, you're on your own." Sort of like what Marty Sheen is doing with Charlie here. But unfortunately, Charlie is me going another way. If I had not gone to Vietnam, I was thinking to myself during the film, maybe I would have become Charlie in Wall Street. I'm a bit of a bad boy, as some people know. I like adventure, and maybe I would have been doing crazy stuff like this. So it occurred to me and Stanley Weiser, why don't we go all the way? The guy needs a tip. He needs a lead. The guys in Boiler Room apparently will do anything. So why not? Here are the 80s. The guy decides he's going to buy a goddamn cleaning company, which is a smart move, and clean these offices at night, which is a brilliant idea. No one's ever thought of it. I think Stanley and I concocted this thing, and it was a wonderful idea. And he takes this little microprocessor Xerox machine, steals these documents. It's industrial espionage, which is illegal. And he's starting to get information to Gecko on a steady basis. This scene at the Palm Restaurant was a disaster for Daryl Hannah and Charlie Sheen, where Daryl is explaining something about Laura Ashley's interior designs. And we did 26 takes. It was one line I'll never forget. I felt like Stanley Kubrick. I just couldn't get the reading I wanted. Very simple. That's the best reading out of 26 takes. But it was hard to get. I don't blame Daryl. Sometimes it's hard for an actor to relate to a line, and it was a lot of things to say, and she was intimidated by it. Because I think Daryl is a bit of a hippie. I don't think that she finally accepted that she could be that person. You see, she was not able to make that leap of faith and just be that woman. So that's happened before. What had happened with Meg Ryan in The Doors, the same thing. I don't think that Meg ultimately approved of Pamela Morrison. So this next section over here is interesting, it sweeps along like a Frank Sinatra song, montages, short hits, Charlie learning the ropes, how to be more sophisticated, getting to know people. And he goes back to see his dad, so we keep the Union theme alive, because this is a very cleverly devised plot. Stanley Weiser did a lot of research, and my father helped. My father's memory helped. It was just a lot of things came together for us. It was the first business film serious one since Executive Suite. And we came up with this idea that the Union, Blue Star, becomes ultimately the prize. Blue Star is a struggling airline, as they all were in that period, which Gecko decides he's going to buy. And he's going to extort from Charlie Sheen and his Union cronies the concessions he needs to make this attractive to Wall Street, at which point he will dump the stock, dump the airline, and make a fortune after he's gotten the concessions. And he gets the concessions through Charlie Sheen, his son. You see, his son sets it up. And that's it. He sells Blue Star out. That's when Charlie turns against Michael, because he understands that Gordon will sell out anybody, including Charlie's father. So the moment that Charlie gave the tip on his father in the office in the first meeting, that was the key flaw, and that it plays itself out here with Charlie giving away his father.
I'm talking to you.
I love this scene. I let them drive on the beach in West Hampton at my friend's house. My then friend, he never spoke to me after this movie again. He was upset with me, rightly so, because I had given his name to a journalist I trusted with the condition that that journalist, writing in the Wall Street Journal, would not use his specific name and protect him. That journalist betrayed my confidence, and he wrote his name and destroyed my friendship with this man who gave me his house. And this is my son, Sean, at the age of 3 or 2. He's a little baby fattish, but it's wonderful to have your children on film. That's a wonderful moment where he throws a strawberry, actually threw the strawberry and hit him under the eye with the glasses. There was no wire used. It was a total accident. That's Saul Rubinek, of course. Was a very, very wonderful actor. I really liked him a lot, and very, very prepared. Michael was very prepared. Unfortunately, this was the typical kind of day where Sean Young was not prepared and didn't know a single line. She sort of took the approach and she'd feel it, you know. So people like Michael and Saul would be offended because they really would like the other actor in rehearsal to know their lines, because the actors will get unconfident and nervous if the other actor isn't there for them. Don't you like Daryl Hannah in a scuba suit? Doesn't this look like a commercial for Jamaica? I love Daryl's look. I thought she was great. I loved her in Splash.
This would almost do.
And this is another scene that
Almost.
is a little callow,
So how'd your conference go with Gordon?
but it does show the vacuity at the center of this woman's mind. And also the lure, the Charlie falls in her sway.
What do you want?
And as in all these types of movies, I fell for the idea that she would really care for him, but at the same time her loyalty was to Gordon, so she would be torn apart.
The best of everything.
Well, why stop at that?
It's a nice little moment. They walk into really a long lens, and the focus pulls good. It's a nice light on Long Island. I love Long Island. I grew up there as a kid a lot, and I had a wonderful time in the beaches of the Hamptons. And that is New York, and in one of its beautiful seasons, we went back to shoot the snow. I love Franklin Covert. This is almost another version of my father. I love the Red Rose. That wasn't my dad. He's grasping for straws.
I haven't had a chance at it, kids.
James Karen I used again in Any Given Sunday. He's the boss. He's a tough face. He's done a lot of commercials, but I just love some of his expressions.
Responsibilities, and I've got 2 kids.
What's going on?
McGinley really has a lot of energy for a business film and helps motivate it. Nixon Flicks, he's famous for that. Many people in New York quote me that line. I wish they could do a little pocket dictionary of all the single quotes and lines. Lunches for wimps, money never sleeps, Nixon chicks, flicks and wicks. There's a lot of wacky lines.
Bud Fox.
You just made my life twice as hard around here.
That's what Richard Brooks told me after I won my second Oscar. It's nothing to the effect of it'll be a long time to get another one, you know. And no matter how good the film is, it doesn't matter. So people call this a morality play. Okay, fine. Morality plays play. They're drama. Shakespeare had them, medieval jousters, and they had them in all. The actors would go through the villages and put on morality plays. I love them.
Oh, this is very nice. This is very nice. So what's it, Mr. Cocksucker now?
Sean and Madonna both reminded me of that line. This is Sylvia Miles talking. She was a wonderful, wonderful character, lives in New York, and first broke through in Midnight Cowboy, I think. She was in a small part, she was great, and Andy Warhol, and she was sort of part of that scene, and she's very good. She's prepared. I wish she was doing more.
Around. Monique something or other.
I love this.
Look, maybe you'd like to see something.
She checks him out by his clothes.
Avenue. Honey, the meter's running. Anybody home?
The meter is running.
All right. Offer $9.50.
You know, I got something over on Sutton. $1.5 million.
That's New York.
Duplex.
So this is Charlie's new apartment, which is done in a style that I invented called the demolition style, which I thought that was fun, and fashion is so ridiculous anyway. That Daryl Hannah, who sort of has business as an interior designer, more of a hobby, to the David Byrne music, which is beautiful here. Just sort of, that's a Julian Schnabel painting. She like talks him into going full out on a demolished apartment. But it's faux demolished, of course. The song is really apropos and really worked for me. It was a type of apartment where it was just so uncomfortable. Look at her hat, she's beautiful. They don't make those hats anymore. We really dressed her. And Gordon Gekko, Ellen Mirojnick did a wonderful job on the cast. I asked my prop people to get the most advanced kitchen and technical things they could get their hands on. Look at that, the pasta maker. That's very intricate stuff. And as a director, I have to say, going through food, these are like commercials. You got to really work at this stuff. And get an actor to do everything she does. Everything she does is like dialogue. I mean, it's like you have to do all those gestures. I thought it'd be funny if we had our own sushi makers.
Who am I?
I was criticized by some critics for having him state what he's thinking. But, in looking at it, it never bothered me. It was, I don't want to cut my films to what somebody thinks is the right way to do it. I like the idea of just saying something. People do that. I mean, sometimes people say, "Who am I?" to themselves, or "What am I doing?" Many people talk to themselves in private. It's not a big deal. But that one really took a beating. But I thought Charlie really delivered it in the right way. It was very soft. That was an auctioneer who really is an auctioneer. He was one of the chief auctioneers at Sotheby's. And in the crowd was James Rosenfeld, the painter, and a few dealers. This is a key scene. It reveals that Gordon and Darian have had a plan to use Charlie Sheen. This is a very interesting turn in the movie. And you can see right away that Darian is twisted about it. She's torn. But she's obviously in Gordon's camp, and that was the first reveal of it. Back to the floor, real floor, during real hours. These are real traders. I love the commerciality of the New York Exchange. They're very tough. They talk straight. And there is an SEC, of course, that monitors in those days the stock trajectories and seeing if there's any abnormalities. It's called Stockwatch in those days, and they did good work in terms of discovering bumps, things that were not quite, that were weird. And there was a large crime spree in the 80s, perhaps no greater than what it generally is, but it was certainly the media reflected on it. And the crime spree busted at least several dozen white-collar workers, and it was most of them were busted by either informers or this Stockwatch, which is the Securities Exchange Commission, one of their regulatory arms. John Glover from Platoon was the investigator there. He's in a completely different, with glasses. He looked quite different, but in Platoon he was blown up and killed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're on.
This speech has become part of a mythology of. It's always funny to read about Gordon Gekko as if he exists. People write about him in columns. Gordon Gekko. I mean, there is no Gordon Gekko. It's Michael Douglas, but he created a character that is like Robin Hood, achieved a weird resonance in American society. The speech always intended to be an ambivalent speech. It was never one-sided. Those who accuse the film of an easy moralism or Manichaeism are wrong. If you really listen to what Gekko is saying here, really listen, half of it makes sense. I mean, it all makes sense in some way, but it's the excesses of it. It's the road of excess. It's losing the sense of moderation that destroy what Gekko really does. But there is nothing inherently wrong with greed as a human, greed being evolution. He describes greed as evolution, as being the primary evolutionary aspect of the human nature that makes us exploit the world, yes, but at the same time create great things, like missiles to space and medicine and health. There's many things going on. Though human beings are tremendously intelligent. We don't even use all our brains, right? But I cannot really disagree with anything Gecko is saying. The management is top heavy. It's all heavy. You see, it's all white, older men, most of them, and they are paying themselves large amounts of money. And the company is top heavy, which is what has happened a lot in the '90s economy. With all this convergence, you're seeing a lot of executives paid far too much in relationship to what their employees are receiving. There's a disconnect, too, between those two classes. And it's very demoralizing to work for somebody who pulls in $1 billion a year and you're pulling in barely enough to make it. I mean, it's just not the way the world is meant to be, but it is the way the world is.
Point is, ladies and gentlemen,
Greed is good.
greed, for lack of a better word.
The idea of the speech came to me and to Stanley during Boesky's saying greed is right at a commencement exercise somewhere. Greed is right. That's the only thing he said. Everything else in the speech is really original, none of which I was in the Boesky speech except for greed is right, which we changed to greed is good. So there's a misconception that it was another person's speech. It isn't. It is a conceived speech for Michael. Michael, like Kevin Costner and JFK, was a little bit worried about the length of the speech. It's around 3 pages. And that was a big day for him. He got there, he nailed it. Take 1, 2, and 3. The guy got it. And that was the opposite actor of the actor that started the movie, who did not have his lines down. So this is a very important thing. As an actor, I think you must have your lines sort of learned. I mean, you must inculcate them completely, so that when you get to the set, you're not fighting the lines. You're fighting what to do with the lines. That's what, yeah, you can do so much more if you're not struggling to remember what they are. This scene was shot in a hangar, an airport, small airport around New York someplace. Bob Richardson did a nice job of rolling the light. This was his first airplane scene, but notice the way the lights roll across the faces. The movement is created with a little bit of jiggle. Look at that. It's nice. You know, it's very much like an airplane when you come in and out of a cloudy, sunny day. I also very like the scene because it's very real.
Tell those spineless assholes will self-insure if they don't write it.
There was a beautiful Polish woman we met, and I wonder whatever happened to her. Charlie believes it. He's not a bad boy. He really believes he's going to make a difference. He doesn't see the big plan here. And also, you notice Michael had his eye on the Polish stewardess who walked past and gave one quick look back, and here he goes. She was really a beautiful woman. Those are the days you want to be a movie star.
Hi, Dad. Hello.
This is a very interesting scene to me. Probably not quite real because it would take place in the office. I wanted to go to his house. The full look of the house is so uncomfortable to the father. It's that type of house where you don't want to have a baby, you know. He'd be running around and impale himself on some piece of furniture within 2 minutes, you know. A very dangerous house to live in. But I have actually stayed in various hotels in New York. I won't say designed by who, but we all know who it is, in which you can barely take a shower without getting water all over the floor. There's no room on the sink to put a toothbrush, and you bump into walls, and you don't know where the lights are. And there's spikes on top of it everywhere. But that's considered the height of fashion in some quarters.
Mr. Fox?
This is an interesting scene because it's the whole show. I mean, they're all together. Bud wants us to work. He wants his dad to like Gecko, which is normal. And Gecko is charming, but he has... Oh, he put the plate through the table. It's a demolished look, designed by Darian. And Martin Sheen has never tasted sushi in his life. Look at those chairs. They're so funny. I mean, would you sit in a chair like that? And that's all wallpaper, of course. But the colors are really pretty. And, you know, I'll tell you the truth, Douglas's plan is not a bad one. It is not a bad one. If he were an honest man, which he's not. It might have worked. But as he says later in the movie, it's because it's wreckable. There is a impulse in Gordon to take, to rape, to predate. But his plan is not a bad one.
Are you prepared to put that in writing? I'll have a letter of agreement drafted up within 2 days.
What's your marketing strategy?
Sounds good.
How do you intend intend to return us to profitability.
Very well done, Michael, because let the son participate.
Effective inventory management through computerization will increase our load factor.
Very smart. And that's what happened. The airlines got so tight, and now people are very complained about legroom.
The point being,
I love this actor. I like his expressions. And none of these people are people I've seen very much in films, too, which is nice. It's a pleasure to see new faces.
In and out for the buck, and he don't take prisoners.
now wait just a minute.
I love Sheen's cutting to the chase.
The wing is, you know where I stand.
Sheen is great. Did a great job. And it was wonderful to work with father and son. Watch this upcoming scene. They're loose with each other. They know each other. They probably had these type of talks before. My father, of course, was a Republican, so it wasn't a similar situation. But I put some of the energies and angers between me and my dad in this scene.
He's got your prick in his back pocket, but you're too blind to see it.
No.
I was criticized for whipping the camera too much here, but I felt like the right thing to do.
That's because you never had the guts to go out into the world and stake your own claim.
Tough words, both sides.
Feel I must have done a really lousy job as a father.
The young shall gnaw their teeth on the bones of their elders. It's hard to be a father. Very hard. I love the argument. You see, it's not simple. It's not black and white. When Charlie gets angry at his dad and says, it's always your man, your man. He's like accusing his father of being a control freak. And he's saying, like, what did you ever do for me? What about our relationship, father-son? You always treated me like I was another union worker, I mean, I'm not just an abstract. I'm a son. I'm your son. So that's the way he breaks through his father's armor. Martin Sheen is just great, and so is Charlie there. Father-son is such a delight. I'm glad I got them together. I wish I could have brought Michael Douglas together with Kirk Douglas, too. It would have been wonderful. I also spoke to Burt Lancaster about a role in the movie as Terrence Stamp role, but I really wanted to work with Lancaster very much. I loved him as an actor, and he was an older man. And we talked on the phone, and he really wanted to do it, but it just didn't work out for timing reasons, scheduling reasons. And then Burt had a heart attack that incapacitated him for a while. Now, going back to see James Spader, this is the beginning of the slip. So the father, when he turns to Charlie, and many people miss this at the end of the movie, when the father turns to Charlie and says, you got to do your time, it's tough love. But you have to understand that Martin Sheen was betrayed in a very bad way by his son. Very few people, they look at it from the other point of view. The daddy. No, what about poor daddy? Daddy really got screwed by his son. The airline was nearly destroyed. It was only Charlie's last-minute rescue on the telephone, which is also very clever, we'll get to that later, that saved that company and destroyed Gordon ultimately.
Well, he didn't tell me about that.
This is a fortuitous accident. It's probably not in the everyday world but to be invited into such a meeting, but Spader assumes that Sheen would know about this. Since Spader's firm is handling the deal, now Charlie is going to understand the full extent of Gecko's betrayal.
Yeah, hi. Hello, bud.
Look, guys.
That's Jeff Beck talking. He was an interesting guy who I met through Michael Douglas, who was working for Drexel and Burnham at that time, which was the #1 glamour firm for hostile takeovers and all that. He's not an actor, and he had a hard time, but he's fucking authentic. Although, in reality, he wasn't authentic because he presented himself as a Vietnam veteran to me and had a big fantasy thing going about the Green Berets and all that, and commandos and SOG, S-O-G. That's Ken Lipper there, who was once the deputy mayor of New York and helped us enormously, and that's Diego. Diego, who died, but he was a wonderful character, and my mother introduced me to Connoisseur, and very, very, very easygoing cosmopolitan, which I liked. I love the lighting that Richardson did here. But Jeff Beck was not authentic. He was never in Vietnam, was exposed about a year later, and he took a big fall on Wall Street. It was in headlines in the Wall Street Journal and New Time and Newsweek that Jeff Beck had invented his own past. But Jeff told me war stories. I believed him when he told them to me. But how wrong I was, you see. Life is an illusion. It's a bit Montgomery Clift, Place in the Sun. He looks like him. Moving in. Listen to the dialogue, the music, the betrayal. They're going to cannibalize that airline. And that was the intention. Strip it, sell the parts, just like Kirk Kerkorian destroyed MGM and UA. When the United States allowed Kerkorian to buy both companies, studios, and destroy both, that was like the end of the movie business as we used to know it. UA and MGM were two great companies. Suddenly, they were one lousy company. And Kerkorian did it for the same reasons as Gecko. He did it for money. He didn't care one iota for making a good film. Never. That was never his intention. It was only to sell things. He's the guy who sold titles. He sold the name. He sold the naming rights. He sold the lion. He sold pieces. He cannibalized. That's what Gecko is doing. This is one of my favorite scenes. It's a one-taker. And it explains a lot.
I took another look at it and I changed my mind.
That's perhaps true. Perhaps it was not his intention to destroy it. Perhaps it came after he bought it. You know, these guys will do what's beneficial to them on a short-term notice. There's no principle governing. There was no intention to create an airline, though. So he's taking care of Buddy and his dad. But what about the other men?
How many yachts can you water ski behind? How much is enough?
It's not a question of...
How many yachts can you water ski behind? I love that line.
Somebody wins, somebody loses.
A zero-sum game. That's the way it is if you're a competitive person, and you see capitalism in that way. A zero-sum game implies winners and losers, which I don't agree with. Somebody has to win, somebody has got to lose. It all comes back to zero. -8, +8. I don't agree with that. Because all boats can rise on a rising sea. Good films can help other films to be open. There's a different psychology at work. If you're overly competitive, you exclusionary and say it's a zero-sum game. I must get 8 +8 for him, and he must lose -8. And Gecko simplifies it down to a painting. He says he bought this painting or this building for X, and he sold it for Y, and he made that profit. And he assumes that somebody else got beat. But that's not necessarily true. You don't always lose. Perfectly timed, I put the window cleaner in there. I'm not sure if he was there or not, but he was a perfect match of that moment. I own. The guy's cleaning his window on the 83rd floor or something. I love the green painting, too. Now, this is Gordon's manipulative mind, taking no chances. Charlie is, in a sense, dazed, and the shot that follows is a simple shot, but it's very complex. We walked him up into a tree, and we reversed ourselves. We did a zoom in as we pulled out, so the perspective in the background changes in a strange way. We're pulling out and we're zooming in at the same time. So it's all unraveling now, and this is the climactic kind of moment. With Darian, it's over.
Bud?
I get much criticized for my treatment of women because it isn't PC. The women in Any Given Sunday, the women I've done, I mean, to me, they're real. It's what I see. I reflect it. And I'm often criticized for it. But, you know, I do believe that PC is a creation of the intelligentsia. And I think that Tanya Harding is probably closer to reality than Gloria Steinem, for example. So it's a narrow-mindedness which really seeks to align human thinking along party lines. Now, it's true that not all of my women are great role models. Absolutely not. But I urge you to check out the men, because the men sure as hell aren't either. They are all, everybody. Humanity is flawed. Marlon Brando once said a great line to me. He said, the truth of the matter is that all human beings are vulnerable. We're all messed up in some way, which is a very broad and humanitarian statement. Charlie is feeling terrible. He realizes he really made a huge mistake involving many people's lives. The first major mistake of his life.
I sure don't like what I see.
And Darian, true motivation now emerges. There is no love there. She's practical.
You may find out one day that when you've had money and lost it, It's much worse than never having had it at all.
Oh, yeah?
I love that line, and that's probably the best line from Daryl in the movie. She said it with conviction, and it's one of the weird truths of capitalism is that for the people who fall in between the cracks, the people who once have had money and then don't have it. Nobody ever talks about them because people generally don't feel sorry for them because they say, oh, you had money. Money creates more jealousy in the human condition than any other thing that I know of, perhaps except love. Maybe more than love. I mean, Balzac was right. Money. If you have money, you are hated. Bill Gates, for example, was hated by the public for no reason. Whoever he was, until he started to give away all his money to charity, and then he was loved. It's a tremendous jealousy about money. And when Daryl says that, that is her conviction. Yes, she likes Charlie, maybe loves him. But look, I've been here. I've been hurt. I've been destroyed. I don't want to go back to being broke again.
Buddy, where you been the last 2 days?
So things are falling apart on Charlie. That's David Byrne's wife, Adele Lutz.
What happened?
He had a heart attack, hon, but he's all right.
This is external to the office, and his father's had a heart attack. But seeing as Gecko is destroying Blue Star, it's quite understandable that the father would have a heart attack under that pressure. It was his decision, ultimately, to allow the vote that destroyed that compact between the unions against the airline. The unions looking out for themselves. It's interesting that we've had all sorts of pilot strikes in the 90s. I'm sure I'm going to get a lawsuit someday blaming me for that. This is a sad scene based somewhat on my own experiences with my father, too. Seeing him in the hospital, so vulnerable and weak and dying. In this case, my father was dying. In this case, thank God he doesn't. But it was so hard to relate to your father when he's a withered person. He's no longer the man that you knew, you see. Because you always think of your father in concrete as some men do, stronger figure or somebody you looked up to. And yet, when you come into your manhood and you see your father, he has no resemblance to that man anymore. He's a shade. He's a ghost of that. He's an imitation of that man. So it's a very bizarre set of circumstances where in a narcissistic world where you say, it's all what my father does to me, it's hard for Bud to step out of himself and to understand that his father has his own life. And in his father's life, his son is part of him, but, it's also about Martin Sheen. And Martin Sheen is dying, he thinks. And it's always too late. You go to your dad and you want to say something, and he's dying on you. Charlie does the right thing for a change. Maybe his father's heart attack just is the final reality that brings him out of it, out of the dream world he's in. And he knows to do the right thing is to go after Gecko and save this goddamn airline if he can. And I like the fact that he has a concrete, very specific plan. He's not an airhead. It's a very tricky thing. Some people will argue that it can't be done. I think it can be done. What he does, the telephone calling, the bidding, the way they manipulate the stock is very well thought out, I think. Some people will say, well, that won't happen because of this and this, but there's always naysayers and everything, Any battle you stage, they'll say, it can't be that, it can't be that. Reality's changed.
He has no union.
Here we go back to Terrence Stamp in the beautiful mansion we shot on the Upper West Side. I love the look of the place.
Can I call you Larry?
So they go to the necessary evil, call him Terrence Stamp, as an ally.
$18 a share.
So you could say that he's John Dean there, Charlie, in the sense that he betrays, but some people would see it that way, and other people would not. He's not betraying, he is doing the right thing, It's a good question. It's like Serpico had the same problem. So did, by the way, the CIA guys. Philippa G. is a tremendous giant of a man for what he did. I mean, he risked all, and so did Victor Marchetti. I love this guy. He's a real pilot. This guy's a real pilot. He's an amateur, I think, studying acting, and he was wonderful. How do you shoot this scene? I try to shoot with a sense of power behind Stamp.
Okay, buddy.
I like that about men. They get together fast when they make it up. I guess money is the great common denominator.
The main thing about money, Bud, it makes you do things you don't want to do.
It's true. It's an aphorism I came up with at that age. That's Michael from Saturday Night Live. Now here we got the whole exchange. This is real stuff going as big and nuts as they can. Do love it so. That's a patent ripoff.
I do love it so.
Then call me.
I love the way the camera positioned him right to the King of New York look. This is the only time I really like fluorescence in scenes like this. When it's a work environment, I just don't like fluorescence for most human behavior because it's so artificial. But this is a ritual done under fluorescence. But I wondered what would happen in Wall Street if, in fact, they changed the lighting and got off the fluorescence. What would happen to the mind? Does fluorescence burn out your brains, or is that just an old mythology? Or does the computer screen burn out your brains? This is perhaps hyperbole, breaking in on them, but it's very dramatic. And the verbiage, although direct and on the money, it has to be in a scene of this length. So everybody gets right down to it. I'm not sure that in reality this is not done more and more through lawyers and proxies and agents, but there is a call and drama for doing it face to face. It's where you can get away with it, you try to do. You know, same thing was in Nixon. I mean, by the time Nixon was so hesitant about everything, by the time he ever did anything, 42 phone calls had taken place. I mean, you can't do 42 phone calls, you know, you do it fast. You try to convey the hesitancy in another way. So we built this entire floor, as I said. It cost a lot of money. The wiring was extremely intricate, but it really paid off in these wide shots, so you get a sense of a successful small firm. Everybody's working already by computer. It's the information age, right? That's what Gecko says. That's what people buy, bud, information. That's what they want. So this is like, what, 87? And it's sort of like is a preview of the next 10 years, 20 years. I mean, we see a lot of these computerizations today. In fact, the screens haven't changed that much, you know? I worked in the stock market once in France at the Cocoa Exchange. It was like La Notte, Antonioni. It's just sort of this madness all the time. People screaming. It was in Paris in the summer. It was very hot, and you had to wear suits with wool.
There's got to be a way out of this, Gordon.
I love this shot.
Hey, Fox, we're losing millions.
The green look. The floor is green for money. There's a very interesting green scene coming up. This is a showdown. This is the Wild West. Gordon loses it. Gordon's always been cool. This is the only time he's not.
What do you want to do? Decide.
Dump it means he takes a huge loss.
Dump it.
Charlie won. Charlie pulls it off. The kid turned on the mentor and beat him at his own game. And I think it's a wonderful ending. My son going through the TV. It's great to have a diary of your son. He's been in 13 of my movies, I think, or 12. And every time I see him grow, you know, and you have a diary on film. Little moments here and there. He was Garrison's boy in JFK. He was the young Jim Morrison in The Doors. He was the Mallory's brother in Natural Born Killers. I don't think Sean is an actor, though. He himself is not given to that kind of extrovertism. So he's much more interior. But it was still a nice little gesture to try to feel time. I love this. This is a repeat of the earlier shot in the film when he came in. Now he comes in and it's a whole different feel, I see. Before he was sort of the victim trapped in the elevator. Here he's on top. But he too must pay a Pyrrhic price, and the SEC is waiting for him in his office. Now, it's a little improbable that he'd walk around with everybody staring at him without noticing it, but, you know, I allow for a little license. They're all in there. He walks the office, and everyone is looking at him. He knows something happened. Chucky.
Did somebody die?
McGinley.
Yeah.
That's Tiresias. And now his Holbrook. There's Chucky,
Morning, Chuck.
who got a Silver Star in Vietnam, fighting with SOG. He was a real trooper.
I like you.
Captain Chuck Pfeiffer, graduate of West Point. There's a key line.
Man looks in the abyss.
There's nothing staring back at him. At that moment, a man finds his character. And that is what keeps him out of the abyss.
This is perhaps my strongest emotional feeling about character. And I think I learned it and he learns it. He doesn't understand it at this point. He will come to.
Can I get my father away?
It's a little dramatic, but they're there. And James Cameron's ready to turn on him in a second. There's the police. He's dead.
Guess you're...
The minute I laid eyes on you, I knew you were no good.
James Cameron does exactly the same thing in Any Given Sunday at the very end when he turns on Tony and he says, bitch, under his breath. This is a pretty inventive tracking shot for its time. I mean, this is tough stuff. This is early Steadicam, or it could have been on a dolly here. I think it was a Steadicam. But we were doing wild moves back in 87, 8, and 9. This is a very nice shot, though. Look at that. It comes around the whole building, all the expressions. Going in was good, too. There was a lot of good tracking, as there was in Born on the 4th of July and later. This is beautiful. We got lucky. You probably, the moisture, it was one of those gray, midsummer. This is July, New York City, 1987. And it rained or it had fog in the air. And it made the setting even better because usually in this park you'd have tons of people. So people would stay out of the park on a day like this. So we were very lucky in a way. It was just pure destiny. And when those kind of things happen late in a movie, you kind of feel like, yeah, it's going to be all right. The movie gods are there. There's somebody on my side, on our side. So I felt particularly good after this day.
Fucking dog shit stock. I gave you Darien!
I think it's dramatic, but I think it could happen. I think weird things like this happen. People who don't normally fight. They see a movie and they want to fight. But there's a great twist in that you'll see in a moment where Charlie Sheen just doubles his boss again. He's wearing a wire. Why didn't Michael Douglas ever search him for a wire? Because it never occurred to him that he would even go to that extent. And Michael just wanted to express his anger. He never thought of it.
I'm just Bud Fox. As much as I wanted to be Gordon Gekko, I'll always be Bud Fox.
That's another key line for me. The abyss, the character, being who you are. I'm Bud Fox. I am not Gordon Gekko. That's finding your own character and trusting it. It's true for an actor as it is for a human being. I love this walkout. This next shot is Napoleonic to me. Beautiful setting. Walks into the tavern on the green here and surprises me with this wire, which essentially ends the film except for the coda when he confronts his parents. And there, I try to explain everything in silence, very few words. They got him on tape saying everything.
You did the right thing, Bud.
He did the right thing, Bud. Did he? I think so. But I leave it ambiguous in Charlie's eyes. Now he's going downtown to get the arraignment. I got much criticized for this, again, by critics, but critics who want to control the message, I think, because what's wrong with the scene? It's a real scene. People talk like that in a weird way. They talk. People do talk. People just don't grunt and groan and Tennessee Williams. It's not all about sex and lust. It's about sometimes morals and values and philosophies. At least I had conversations like that with my father, and I think other people do. One of the great thrills of my life is when a father and a son sit in one of my movies, and a mother too, and a daughter, but mostly it's father, son, and they see a movie together. It binds them. They get it. They walk out, It happened to me with Paths of Glory, Lawrence of Arabia, things with my dad, a lot. So I feel like this is a binding. You got to go through it. You got to pay a price. Then you really earn it. And he'll work again. He'll come back. And they left me there in the canyons of Wall Street. An ant, another one of the millions of ants. each with their own shaky moral ethos. And I left it and I moved on. Sort of like saying we're all absorbed in this landscape, this system, this capitalism, if you will. And it is a gloomy day. It was that day. It wasn't set out to be. It just was. It was the way the dice were thrown. This is July 4th or 3rd, 1987. We finished right around then, and wow, I went for the old-time titles, the end. I forgot how big those were. Look at that. This is 87. And I dedicated it to my father, who had died while I was making Salvador. It was the second film I dedicated to him. Salvador and this one. I think in his way he would have enjoyed it. He would have criticized me probably for details again, but did the best I could, Dan. What a great cast. They were wonderful people. I missed them. I remember every one of them. I remember Michael O'Donoghue. And I had a relationship to each one of them in some way. Every film is like that. You make a new family. It's a wonderful experience in the sense of being out there. But you get to know a lot of people after a while. Thousands. So you join the collective unconscious. The irony is that my goodwill towards Fox, little did I know the movie game in those days. Although it was promoted by Scott Rudin, I believe he left before the film was released. We came down to December. I showed the film to Fox, and Barry Diller, above all, was the chief along with Rupert Murdoch. Barry never liked the film as much as he liked Broadcast News, which was the other film that Fox had for Christmas with James Brooks, who I admire deeply, and it's a very wonderful film. But Barry made a conscious decision to platform Broadcast News and to really push it for the Oscars. And he kind of like threw us away into 2,000 theaters or something across the country in places like Fort Walton, Florida. There's no way that Wall Street's intelligentsia, the verbality of it, the verboseness of it, the dialogue, the intelligence would play in Fort Walton. So we killed ourselves. In other words, Diller was saying, let's make a quick kill. He didn't believe in the film. Surprisingly enough, we did endure, and we didn't get any nominations except for Douglas. And I think Broadcast got 7 or 8. And they did not win 0 that night. And of all the people, it was Michael Douglas who won it. So in an inverse way, we became the Fox bad boy. And we defeated all the expectations. And our gross domestically was almost equivalent to Broadcast News, which they had pushed much harder. It's a funny game, Every time in movies that you want to go one way, you have to think that life is going to take you the other way,